Hi, Peter.
Hi, Taya. Great to see you.
You too. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Yeah.
Would you introduce yourself and maybe give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Peter Fullerton, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a tenor and a voice teacher, voice coach, located in Portland, Oregon. And I know we're going to talk a little later on about my journey as a transmasculine singer and all the details about my experiences with testosterone. But for now, I'll just say when I started voice teaching, I had been on testosterone, probably about 7 or 8 years at that point. And I really found that transmasculine singers were very interested in working with me because if they were on testosterone, they were maybe having some challenges and really feeling like it's helpful to study with a teacher who has actually gone through that themselves. So, quite by accident, I wound up with a handful of transmasculine students and then more transmasculine students. There's a phenomenon in the trans community where people are great about resource sharing. So, my name got out there. And I was essentially conducting informal research, just having a large sample size to observe what happens when people take testosterone. And I was meeting people before they started, when they were some people approaching me in the middle of the process, some people approaching me after voice change. And what I found was that all the research literature in the voice pedagogy space was really misunderstanding and not providing a good explanation in the research literature of what these individuals were experiencing. And in fact, there was a lot of misinformation, which was very discouraging. So I really made a conscious decision at a certain point to specialize in this demographic and with the goal of getting resources out, getting information out, and combating some of the sort of anti-transition mythology that I know we'll talk more about a little later.
Thank you so much for sharing that and giving us a bit of an overview, a bit of a summary. Some things that were sticking out for me is that lived experience is so amazing and so essential, I think, especially in this work, and how wonderful that your life and your vocation and your passions are so interconnected with like the work that you do and make your living and uplifting so many trans masc and trans non-binary and trans men singers, vocalists of many genres. You have a background in classical music, but also musical theater. I'd love to know a little bit about kind of where you started with your musical journey and then how you came to testosterone and how that was for you.
Yeah, so I really, as a very young child, was just enchanted by singing and by music and just drawn to it. Very good at, I don't know, good audio memory. Like I would hear things and just have it locked into my mind. And I'd be dancing around my parents' living room listening to Les Mis, which, yeah, was a big influence when I was like 4. And as I got older, I was really interested in musical theater. I thought that I might be interested in pursuing that professionally. And I got into voice lessons extremely young because I was pushing for that. I was about 11 when I started. As I got older, I have a larger voice type, which I think caused my voice teachers to hear my sound when I was 15, 16 and say, hey, maybe you would be well suited for classical music. And the problem that I ran into was that for me as a classical soprano, all of the singing was, to my perception, to my ear, very feminine. And I know that that's an interpretation. It's not inherently feminine. That was my interpretation of the sounds I was making, but it was really causing a lot of gender dysphoria issues for me. So by the time I was 18 or 19, I was on track. I had a very serious conservatory voice teacher who I really was not comfortable with at all. And I wound up dropping out of singing because I was sort of having just a crisis, an identity crisis of sorts. So I went through a few years of, trying to understand my gender, trying to understand what was going to work for me, realizing that testosterone was necessary. And then there was even more delay as I was trying to process emotionally and in my relationships and my family relationships, try to make sense of yeah, how this is going to impact my life. So I actually found my way back to singing after voice change and really started over. So that's a huge other topic we could talk about, but it was very humbling. It was like approaching this as a total beginner, and I think it might have been different if I had worked through my transition versus stopping singing and coming back to singing was really a starting over. Yeah.
You talked about feminine, or feeling that the voice or the vocal production was feminine. Was it specifically like the vocal production, or was it more the characters and the roles that you were playing because of your voice type that felt very feminine?
That's a great question because it was both. Yeah, I think it was both. And the types of arias when I was 18, 19, being such a young soprano, especially, that these roles were hyper feminine. A side character who sings an aria about losing her ring, and it's a metaphor for virginity, and very, very feminine heterosexual characters.
Of course. Yes. No, totally. Just like reinforcing that cis hetero narrative, right?
Yes, and I wasn't always clear, by the way, on why it was uncomfortable for me. I just was so dissociated from myself because of the discomfort that I was feeling that actually really complicated the process of self-discovery, was that it was so hard to be present with what I was even experiencing.
Yeah.
But it was also the sound. I would hear the sound and I would think, what does that have to do with me? And really not understanding why. And I just felt like, well, it's so different from pop singing. Is it possible that that's what I'm reacting to? And it was confusing. There wasn't a lot of cultural modeling for me of other examples of transmasculine singers, or even the concept that people could be transgender was not a concept I was familiar with until I was about 18.
Wow. It's just wild to fathom that, like, lack of examples or lack of language or lack of just kind of common knowledge can set so many people back, or prevent their evolution or self-development, or hold them back for many years. Yeah. I really resonate with that, like performing a lot of those feminine characters in my teenagehood and my early 20s, and up into my 30s as well. So yeah, it's tough when there are no examples.
Yes, and that's why I so appreciate what you're doing to be visible and to share with the world, because I know that makes an impact for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Well, I hope it does something, and if that's the one thing that it does, then that's great. That'll make me happy. Yeah. Yes. So you also talked about not singing through your testosterone vocal change. Yes. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, I know you said you didn't, you chose not to, but were there more results that occurred because you didn't sing through the change?
Yes, and I can flesh out some details because it's a little more nuanced than didn't sing. I would say I wasn't working on my voice. I wasn't working with a teacher. I wouldn't say I completely stopped singing. What I did was I shifted away from classical soprano singing, and I tried to explore other ways to use my voice. And what I was doing a lot of as a college student was sitting in my dorm room with this guitar I bought at Goodwill and trying to sing Beatles songs in more of a alto or tenor range. And I would say it did not go well because I really didn't understand the registration that was necessary for me to sing those songs. And it was very chest voice heavy singing. So that gave it a little too much clumsiness and forcefulness, I think. And when I started testosterone, I was on what now would be considered a fairly high starting dose. Over the decades, the practices have evolved to be a little more sophisticated and a little more resembling natural puberty. And so I was getting blasted with hormones. I had a lot of side effects, a lot of the menopause side effects like hot flashes, a lot of the puberty side effects like mood swings. I was full of any minor irritation. I would have this huge rage response, and I knew that was inappropriate, but I was clocking it. And I had a lot of hoarseness and sort of laryngitis symptoms that people were reflecting back to me. Oh, are you sick? And I think my voice dropped pretty fast under those conditions. And what I wound up noodling with was singing the song Stars from Les Mis, which is a baritone range, very squarely in a baritone range, where it wasn't, for me as a tenor, it wasn't that high. And so it was something I would experiment with. And then I went to grad school and auditioned for the university's production of West Side Story. So even though I don't have a lot of information about my voice change, I know that by at least that point, which was about 8 or 9 months in, I was comfortably singing that baritone ensemble stuff in West Side Story. So that was actually a perfect opportunity for me to perform because I hadn't figured out my voice yet. It was all ensemble singing, so it didn't really matter. The range was so narrow. It was so accessible. And by the way, what an experience to be one of the guys, right? I was one of the Jets. It was so profound. It was really very, very special and exciting. And there's one character that's supposed to be the youngest Jet, and he's very fearful, scaredy pants. And so I was shorter than everybody. It was a perfect fit. Yeah.
Did you feel typecasted?
Oh, yes, but I also understand as a performer typecasting. Yes. Yes, I did feel typecasted but in a way that was ultimately very gender affirming because again, it was really about the group of guys and they totally accepted me. This was in England. I was passing for cis male more consistently in England than I was in the United States at that point.
Cultural shift, right? Like there's such a, I'm not going to just say spectrum, but there's such a diversity in masculinity as well. And how we express it across different cultures. I hope that was affirming for you to be passing. I know sometimes people don't want to pass, so.
It was affirming and confusing and anxiety inducing because there's this feeling that I was fooling people. That was, it was just a feeling I had. I think there is a little bit of a cultural discourse around that might have influenced me. But, I felt like I'm walling off parts of myself. I'm doing it in an experimental way. I've never had this opportunity to do this. Possible dating settings. It was just very hard to navigate. Like, what do I reveal and when do I reveal it and what's going to happen when I reveal it? And it turned out in the instance of the show I was in, by the end of the show, I became aware that everyone knew I was trans, but hadn't mentioned it because they're British and they're very polite. So if I wasn't going to bring it up, they weren't going to bring it up. But then my classmates had no idea, the people I was actually in courses with. I was going to gender studies classes and debating trans identity as if it wasn't personal to me. And some of those gender studies professors were very anti-transition. Yeah.
Wow. I'm so sorry.
I had to read academic articles that were anti-transition.
Wow.
And I was just keeping my mouth shut.
How
very awkward.
Complicated and scary and rage-inducing and all the feelings. And I'm so sorry. I'm hoping things have shifted, but they're also shifting in different directions again right now. I feel like we're in a very turbulent time, especially with trans rights and trans rhetoric. I think doing what you're doing, helping trans singers and speaking about trans voice and, talking with me publicly, this is important to just get our stories out and demystify that kind of demonizing ideology.
Yes. And I think there's an intentional suppression of trans stories and information that might be helpful to trans people. I think it's intentional, calculated, and in my circumstances, it was very successful in the sense that I was a trans kid. I didn't know that trans kids existed, and it did impact me, and it did not prevent me from becoming a trans adult. So withholding the information harmed me and complicated my life and successfully convinced me I was the only trans person in the world for a time.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, yeah.
Yeah. That isolation, right? or you feel like you're the only one doing the thing, you know? And I think I felt like that a little bit too when I was thinking about taking tea for myself as a singer, but that also thank God we have the internet, because it led me to look elsewhere and to look for people who were like me or potentially adjacent to what I was doing or or thinking about doing. So
Yes.
thank God I could find you on the internet. And that brings me to how I did find you. You have this amazing monthly session that you hold. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And
Yes, yeah, happy to. I love this group. This is one of my favorite things I'm doing right now, and I've only been doing it for about a year and a half. So I had started this online offering, which was what we called an info session. It was more of a informational presentation about voice change with my colleague Eli Conley, who's also transmasculine, openly trans, and a singer-songwriter. And he's also a voice teacher. And so we had this collaborative offering where we would talk about voice change, give advice. And the second half of it was a Q&A session and a personal sharing session. Have about a half hour of Q&A, about 20 minutes of personal sharing. And that was so meaningful and valuable. I thought, well, gosh, I would really like to just have a chance to do that more often. I was also inspired by, monthly meetup groups that are more sort of generalized support groups for trans folks. And so I started this group. It's called This Is My Voice on Tea, which of course is a commonly used phrase for people on social media. Yes. And they'll make recordings to document their voice changes. And so you'll hear, this is my voice on tea at 3 months. This is my voice on tea at 6 months. And those are always great to see. So it's meant to be a chance for people to come together, talk about their voices. We get to hear each other's voices as people are talking, which is so thrilling. I mean, the diversity is incredible. And it's just another chance for people to understand that they're not alone. The struggles that they're facing on testosterone are actually very common and solvable. I think it really does a lot for peace of mind just to have that camaraderie and collaboration and get questions answered, frankly, which is so huge. Yeah, it's hard to find this info.
oh, it's amazing. I've been to about, I think, 3 sessions, maybe 4 over the course of a year. So before I started tea, then when I started tea, I was 1 week on tea when we did a session together. So that was just joyous to be able to say, I'm 1 week on tea, in this group of trans mask people wanting to know about their voice more and sing. So it's very affirming. The space that you've created is so affirming and a soft place to land for so many different types of trans mask people that are just at different points on their musical journey or their vocal journey. So thank you so much for offering that. And
Well, thank you.
yeah, I'm obviously I was inspired by your session and this trend of trans mask singers, with the phrase, this is my voice on tea. And that's what I've titled my series as well. So yeah,
Perfect.
Let's just keep getting it out there, right?
Perfect.
Yes.
I think it's a great term because it's so searchable.
Yes.
People can search for it.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And I feel like this phrase, this is my voice, it can speak to not only the singing voice or the speaking voice, but just one's voice as a human, as an artist, as a person in the world, and that constantly evolving, that self-reflection and reflecting of the world and the world that we live in right now. Which is, there's a lot going on. Yep.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that, I guess, it brings me more to your collaboration with Eli Conley too. I also took another info session that you present for singers on testosterone, and you spoke very eloquently about the 5 stages of transgender voice change on testosterone. And I'd love to know a little bit more about that. And I know you also have a great video that you have on YouTube, so people can look at that in detail later, which I'll link below.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think part of the power of the Singing on Testosterone info session, this is something we've offered a number of times, maybe 10 or 12 times, and we're currently offering at a rate of about once or twice a year. I think part of the power of this offering is the sheer number of people Eli and I have both worked with on testosterone. I mean, we've both been on testosterone for the long term. We both have our own teaching studios where singers on testosterone are finding us out. And there's a little bit of a genre distinction there because Eli's a singer-songwriter. He's seeing a lot of singer-songwriters. Because I'm into musical theater, I'm working with a lot of actors and some number of classical singers and choir singers and some people in bands. We really have a lot of expertise, and we can say this is what's common on testosterone, and this is what we see, and this is what we expect, and all of these things that seem so odd or peculiar are actually normal and temporary, or there are strategies for working through. But the first time we offered this, when we were writing the curriculum, I did a real deep dive into the research, and I continue to be so disappointed with so much of the research on voice change with testosterone therapy. I thought I'm going to start to look at the research into adolescent cisgender male voice change, because truly there are decades of research. There's a particular researcher, John M. Cooksey, who's sort of the giant in that field, and so much of the current work that's published on adolescent voice change refers to Cooksey's work. This has a great summary of what happens during adolescent voice change, but other publications also contain the same research data. And what I found when I read it was, oh my God, this is literally exactly the same thing. He talks about this lengthy process and these different stages and these types of voice changes that occur at different stages. I think the obvious difference between teenagers and adults is that teenagers are also exposed to growth hormone, so they're growing a lot more than adults do. Otherwise, it's really the same process. And I thought I might even share a little bit from this book. This is a little blurb about is from the appendix, the middle stage of voice change. Tell me if this sounds familiar. So in the what he calls the mutational climax stage, what I call stage 3, that's the very middle. He says the normal age span of boys in this stage is 13 or 14, to give you a clue of that context. Vocal quality is huskier, thicker, perhaps perceptually thinner sounding. These voices are susceptible to hoarseness and abuse. Register breaks are very apparent during this time. There's extreme instability in the upper pitch range where strain can occur easily. Perceptually, listeners can hear some of the emerging baritonal quality in the lower pitch range, but the upper pitch range remains light and displays increased breathiness or strain. There is a very common tendency towards pushing. All of that is exactly what I see when adults are right in the thick of things with voice change. And I think that is such a relief to know that, and to know that those are temporary issues. They're normal, they're expected, and they get better with time and through voice training.
Just to know that it's normal to have all of these chaotic symptoms happening. And you talk about like these stages of chaos as well.
Yes.
Which I love, to also just be aware that it's going to happen. It's going to be like going through a hurricane, or, but stages of a hurricane, and there will be moments of respite, but then you might be back in the hurricane again, right? And then coming eventually out of that whole storm, which could be months, maybe a year or so.
Yes, I think with adults, it's rare to have those symptoms for a long sustained time. Let me also say this. I have met with people who don't have these symptoms. They are the lucky ones. So there's no guarantee that there will be a hurricane. It might actually be quite smooth sailing. It depends on the individual. I see two patterns with the symptoms, depending on how fast or slow the transition is. In a fast transition, which is more like what I experienced, there's a ramping up of the symptoms. They start to build and get worse and worse. And that's, again, it's that middle stage where they climax. And then there's a sort of decrescendoing of symptoms sort of starting to go away. In a slower transition, we have more stability in between voice changes. So we have, the voice might drop, then it sort of stabilizes for a while, then maybe, 12 months or 16 months later, it drops again, then it stabilizes again. In that model, we see flare-ups of symptoms when the voice is changing. So then there's long periods where there's no symptoms. So I think there's so much talk about the chaos that it may even get a little bit overstated, that it can be very chaotic, but that doesn't mean it will be for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'm still waiting for that stage, that chaos stage, and it's 7 weeks and a few days, and I'm like, when's it gonna happen, Peter?
And it's also the shortest stage, by the way.
Okay.
So I have a teenage son, and I was very carefully watching his voice change, and I think for him that stage lasted about a weekend, and then it was over.
Wow.
That's how fast it can be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I really kind of gotta keep my eyes out for it, and be vocalizing a little bit every day just in case.
Yes. I've just been framing this way for people lately, is that the voice changes when the drops are very rapid. They happen very quickly, but they actually happen so quickly that it takes a minute for our brain to catch up. And so we don't necessarily experience them in real time when they're happening. It's more of in the week after going, hold on, did something change? And so there can be a slow build to realizing that the voice has dropped, but the drops when they happen are incredibly rapid voice changes.
Okay. Some
of the misinformation I've read said that voice change with testosterone is a gradual process. And I thought, no, it is not. It is not gradual. It is sometimes parts of it are very boring and parts of it are very fast.
So it's like you're in an elevator that is slowly moving like this, and then it sometimes drops maybe a couple floors. A malfunctioning elevator, maybe.
Yes. I guess I also would add, and I think it's worth repeating, that, everyone is so unique. Yes. So there are some universalities and also a lot of individual variety in the particular timing. And you can see that with kids. Like, if you take a group of 13-year-olds, they're all going to be at sort of slightly different phases of puberty, even though they're the same age.
I'll send you a little voice memo when it does happen. If I can perceive it happening, I'll send you a voice memo.
Yes, I'm so excited for you. Yes.
Thank you. Years ago, when I was potentially thinking about tea, but put it out of my mind as an option for myself, I had heard this narrative that if you take tea, you will ruin your voice or wreck it, or it will get stuck. And this idea of voice entrapment came up, and you presented a really informative talk and published a paper with Tessa Romano this past summer at the International Voice Teachers Conference in Toronto, where we got to meet in person for the first time, which was great too. And I would love to hear a bit more about this concept, and is this actually a thing?
Right. What a great question, because I know that so many people are wondering about this. Let me start by saying no. I have never seen a single instance of entrapment in the real world. So entrapment is only talked about in the research literature in vocal pedagogy. It's not talked about in medical literature. It's not talked about in speech and language pathologist literature. There's no other documentation that suggests that it would exist. All of the research literature into voice change with testosterone in vocal pedagogy all reference entrapment, but that's the only place where it is ever talked about or discussed. I have personally worked with hundreds of singers who use testosterone, and that includes one-on-one sessions where I'm really getting a very deep window into what's going on with that singer. I've worked with over 100 individuals one-on-one, 100 individuals who are on testosterone, and I've worked with over 600 individuals in group settings. I've seen 0 instances of entrapment, but I have seen things that look like entrapment symptoms. So I understand why people might be confused about this, but the original way of looking at voice change with testosterone was not, this is a process similar to male puberty. The original mindset was, This is a female to male transition, and we have no idea what will happen to the singing voice, the female singing voice, if it's exposed to testosterone. And so going into it, there's all these already all these assumptions, all these beliefs, including a belief that there is such thing as a female larynx, which I don't really think is true. I think we have the human larynx. I think it comes in all different shapes and sizes, but it's, essentially one human instrument. And we now know that gender transition is really medically designed to mimic puberty. And so what do we get? We get puberty symptoms, including voice change. So I think that if people realized that this was essentially male puberty, they might not have reached such alarmist conclusions. But what we saw was there was a 2008 study. It was the first published study, serious study, looking at singers on testosterone, and that was a big deal. And I don't want to minimize how important and how essential that research was in bringing this topic to mainstream readers, or mainstream voice teacher readers, I should say. So it was also a study conducted by a trans man, and I think that caused people to take it very seriously. This person must know what they're talking about. But the problem was the average length of time these subjects had been on testosterone was 1.5 years. So what do we know about voice change? There's a lot of laryngitis symptoms right in the middle of voice change, and we know that it takes 2 to 5 years. So I would say what he was studying was not the voice that is on testosterone and fully changed from testosterone. What he was studying was the voice in transition, but he didn't really realize that nuance. And if he had looked at the research into adolescent male voice change, he would have recognized all the symptoms of entrapment are voice change symptoms. Hoarseness is a voice change symptom, right? Limited range, very, very, very limited range is a normal part of vocal transition. Again, not everyone will experience that symptom, but it is normal for those who do. The important thing to mention is there was no scientific evidence that entrapment had occurred. What there was evidence of was symptoms. And because the researcher did not have an explanation for the symptoms, he speculated a possible reason. And his possible theoretical condition of entrapment was, well, perhaps what is happening is that while testosterone thickens the vocal cords, because these are adults, their larynxes are not growing bigger. So therefore, perhaps, maybe, the vocal cords are getting entrapped inside the larynx. And it's a distortion of the anatomy is what he was imagining. But the problem was other researchers who wanted to write about voice change with testosterone did not have a wealth of other sources. And so they repeatedly cited this study. And they did not really understand the nuance that this was not scientific fact. It was not proven. It's not appearing in the medical research. So other researchers reprinted it as fact and cited that 2008 study. And every other study that examined singers on testosterone only looked at singers in the first 2 years. I think there was one study that looked at the first 30 months, which is about 2.5 years. But again, voice change takes 2 to 5 years. So that was creating a sort of like circular echo chamber where people kept finding voice change symptoms and holding those up as proof of entrapment. Now, I will say there's a different phenomenon, which is that as people's voices change and they're disoriented with how to use their voices, it's very, very common to develop significant muscle tension around the larynx. And that can also create entrapment symptoms. So I could show you what entrapment symptoms might sound like. And it's just all I'm doing is I'm tensing all these muscles, right? Or sometimes there's a lift to the larynx. And so it's sort of a lifted larynx tightness. All of that is muscle tension. And those entrapment symptoms really map onto the symptoms of muscle tension dysphonia. So anyone I've seen who has those entrapment symptoms, they're either voice change symptoms that go away with time, or they are muscle tension symptoms that go away through voice training. The latest research on entrapment shows that it improves with training, so it's not a permanent anatomical distortion. And the guy who first introduced the idea of entrapment stopped writing about entrapment as he got further in his career. Right? So his most recent study, published in 2017, said it was a case study of a performance active trans man who was middle-aged, I think, and continued performing through his transition. So what the case study concluded was, this is a voice change that looks very similar to adolescent male voice change. No mention of entrapment. So even the guy who invented entrapment abandoned the idea of entrapment, but not everyone has gotten the memo. And so we need to raise awareness that, one, this wasn't real. Two, no one has ever proven that it exists. And three, the person who brought it to our attention doesn't seem to still believe in it either.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for giving us that really, really in-depth overview, but also breaking apart how sometimes these incorrect claims or narratives can be harmful for many people and just perpetuate something that's wrong and something that, wasn't conclusive because it was only showing a certain amount of time. And like you said, 2 to 5 years. I really need to, I think, ingest that this is going to be a long time. My voice is not going to change in 6 months and then be like, okay, that's what it is. Now I am a tenor. You know what I mean? Or now I'm a baritone.
Yes, I do think the most dramatic changes tend to happen in the first half or first 2/3. So when we say 2 to 5 years, it really slows down by the end. So we arrive at the destination in terms of range by the end of the 4th stage. If we think about a 5-stage model, in stage 5, what's changing is the shape of the vocal tract, not the thickness of the vocal cords. So at that point, we're sort of at our destination. We're still opening up resonance. It is true that it can take a long time. It also sometimes happens a lot faster for adults because we're on a different timeline. So 2 to 5 years is typical for kids. It's also typical for adults who are on a slower transition. Some adults, it's like 9 months.
Wow.
So you
Even with a low dose, do you think?
Even with a low dose.
Wow.
Even with a low dose.
So it's really kind of genetic roulette, like what you unlock and what is in your system.
You can have, I've never done this, you can have your androgen receptors tested to assess how quickly your body might be able to process testosterone. So that's part of your genetic makeup, and I think there's more to it than just androgen receptors, but that's one thing that's measurable.
It's just fascinating to just take in the information that has been researched and published just even over the last 10, 15 years, right? It's changed, it's evolved, It's expanded, so... And there's more to come. I'm sure many more people are researching and publishing and finding, I wouldn't say conclusive answers, but just adding to the diversity of what a testosterone changed voice will be.
Yes, I would say even in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been a dramatic shift in the kind of academic discourse about this in the world of vocal pedagogy. And what we're really seeing now is more evidence that people can be successful. And again, that's not conclusive. It's just evidence. It's more data, right? And the other major shift, I think, has been away from this idea of female to male transition, which personally I think is an inappropriate conceptualization, because to say that someone is female is a projection. We're taking physical realities and we're assigning judgments to them. Those judgments are not inherent. And so I don't think it's appropriate to linger on the female to male of it all. And I also feel like the main thing that transgender people seem to want as a community is, please stop affiliating us with our gender assigned at birth. And so taking that to heart would mean, I think, retiring those phrases, which had a purpose 20 years ago. That was language I used to describe my own journey. But I think as our understanding evolves, using different terms because it affects how we conceptualize this. And I've known voice teachers to have concerns about, well, we don't know if we give a female person testosterone, what happens to the voice? I would say you're kind of putting blinders on and not seeing a lot of helpful information that would benefit this conversation because you have such a narrow definition of, what this is.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. No, I think you're bringing to light a larger criticism probably of this field of research, this field of pedagogy, like how we talk about it. I know you've told me that you've had to react to this driving kind of ethos in the culture. And if you could give us a bit more information about that and what you hope to change, if anything, about that.
Yes, great question. Well, before this article came out in Journal of Singing that I co-wrote with Tessa Romano, I was thinking about writing something, trying to get it published about voice change with testosterone to share information, because my attitude is people are getting in touch with me saying, I cannot find information anywhere about this. And so I thought it would be so helpful to have something published in that very, mainstream voice teacher publication. And Tessa actually approached me and asked me about co-writing this entrapment article. And Tessa's attitude was, this is actually really important because people are sharing, and this is true, I agree, people are sharing misinformation, and singers are making life decisions based on misinformation. And so we really have a urgent need to clear the record on that. So that was the article that I wound up getting published in Journal of Singing, was this kind of reactive, and I think it's valuable, of course. It's a contribution to the conversation already in process, right? But in a perfect world, I would rather not have to react to misinformation, which, is not the world I live in. The world I live in has misinformation, and then I feel an obligation to set the record straight. But, it's frustrating. A lot of the discourse about transition is very negative, and these, terrible offensive beliefs that trans people are brainwashed and it's a cult and it's not an authentic identity, and that it's so harmful. And yeah, there's this larger issue in our society that we can't just start with the place of, well, gee, I just want to be treated with respect, right? That's an idea we can all get behind. It instead gets perverted into something totally different. And then there's accusations of sex abuse crimes, right? So it's just another way that I think people who are anti-trans hijack the conversation. And then, we're left trying to assess, like, when do I respond? When do I not give it the dignity of a response? When do I start a conversation on my own terms, and who's going to listen to that? And what I found was a lot of voice teachers with more mainstream ideas about gender were not open to hearing me out. And the most revolutionary thing that I believe is this idea. I don't believe that there's really a distinction between female voices and male voices. And when I express that, I'm really met with the response of, well, if you're going to say something that outlandish, you really need to cite a lot of evidence. And that exhausts me to hear that, because it feels like my expertise is not really credible to people who don't agree with me.
I can imagine how not only frustrating but also exhausting that would be to have to constantly prove one's research or one's work, because it feels very parallel to needing to prove one's identity.
Yes. I think there's also a real parallel to misogyny, because again, it's a marginalized gender position that you and I are in. And so it's sort of like that thing, like, believe women, believe trans people.
Yes.
Like, just believe us, please.
Yes. I love that. Let's add that on to that phrase. Believe women and believe trans people.
And believe people who are oppressed and marginalized, because part of the work of marginalizing a community is discrediting them.
I'm also really reflecting on the fact that what you're doing in just existing, and your work and your publications and your talks and your advocacy is very much like in line just with like decolonization acts. And that's a concept that I've been trying to figure out how to iterate in the classical music, especially in the operatic world. And I feel like what you're doing, you're decolonizing voice pedagogy and how we look at voice and how, but also I'm seeing so much how it's interconnected into sexism and misogyny and patriarchy. Everything is washed with that.
Yes, and I think it's so interesting because the function of art can be to challenge dominant belief systems that are oppressive, and yet the industries replicate all of the inequalities that already exist in our society. And so I think there's a real tension there. And so I'm so fascinated by the kinds of art projects that you are doing in your transition, before your transition, that I'm sure you'll do after transition, because you're really using your art form to do what I think art is meant to do, which is change the way people look at things, offer these different perspectives. And I also think there's a real overlap between the function of art and then queerness, which is, a whole other topic. But this idea of just, queering whatever is mainstream and those of us who don't fit the mainstream, and how do we show up for the conversation, and what do we want to create artistically that really tells our stories. Of course it's going to challenge the dominant conventions. Of course it is, because those conventions are not made for us.
Totally. You've summarized that so well. And, I sometimes I ebb and flow with this feeling of apathy, and I question, like, what am I doing with my life? Now that I'm 40, going to be 41 in a few months, like when am I ever going to grow up? When am I ever going to get a real job? But I think existing as an artist and being in the arts, like, I'm going against that status quo of capitalism, of getting a 9 to 5, of being cis and heteronormative and more whitewashed or white passing. And so I'm inspired by your reflection here and like the work that you're doing, and to keep arting, to keep going, to keep making change, and to keep making and imagining and creating the world that I want to live in.
Definitely. Yes.
So thanks for that.
Absolutely. I think that's one of my favorite things that I do is empower artists to do what you do. That if I can give you some tools so you can do this vitally important work, it's so important. And I really think your path is so ripe for impact, because the fact that you've established a career and, really quite a long career already at this point, and are at this point transitioning, I think is really unique. Hopefully will be less unique in the future, but the classical singers that I hear from on Testosterone tend to be early 20s or younger. And so they're transitioning before their career starts, which in some ways might be easier. There really is tremendous pressure, I think, for classical sopranos, classical mezzo-sopranos especially, to not transition with testosterone. And so for you to just go for it in a public way is so inspiring. And I know that will influence people. I know it will. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm also really curious about, how I can maybe maintain some of that soprano range or that mezzo soprano range, and those colors, because I do love singing there. Like, it's my voice. It's what I've used for the past 40 years. It's what I've built a career on, and singing professionally for 20 years. I can't believe it. And so it's been a huge tool. It's been a huge, like, dare I say, like, fifth appendage, right? But like a more ethereal one, or one that that's not actually like tangible, or like I can't touch it because it's inside of me. So what would you, as a trans vocal coach specializing in this, like offer to me to try to maintain that or bring that into whatever range I build lower?
Yes, definitely. And yeah, there's almost two different questions in there because one question might be specific to the high range, and another variation on this might be more holistic to the whole range. So I'll start with the high range, but we might even get into a little bit of both. I think it's helpful if we can look across gender lines and look at who's using that head voice, or what we might consider. What if we conceptualized soprano to refer to a type of singing rather than just a voice type? I mean, it's both, but what if we talk about soprano singing as a type of singing that sopranos can do, mezzo sopranos and altos can do it, countertenors can do it. They might not literally be in a totally soprano range. Some countertenors can sing soprano, and these are, for anyone who doesn't know, typically cisgender men who are singing oh in head voice or falsetto. And so we know it's possible. After voice drops, people can still train, and depending on their voice type, that might put them in a soprano range, a mezzo soprano range, or an alto range. We also can see there are plenty of trans women and trans feminine people who sing quite high even, and then there are transmasculine folks who use testosterone, their voices change, and then they go back to singing mezzo. I've met those people as well. So there's again, there's differences for the period of transition compared to the period after transition. During transition, we might be susceptible to vocal cord inflammation and swelling. So that's really just laryngitis. And laryngitis is on a spectrum. If laryngitis is very mild, we have maybe a little bit of clumsiness, or things are just a little complicated, but we're basically still singing fine. If swelling is severe, we might lose our voice. And then if swelling is medium, we're really going to notice significant impact to the high ranges, maybe even more obvious than the impact to the low ranges. So what might it feel like? It might feel delicate. It might feel like we don't have the power we're used to or the projection we're used to. That's laryngitis. So we could work on minimizing laryngitis symptoms. That might help. But I think part of what needs to happen is we just need to be gentle in the approach. Here's what's really counterintuitive, is that you're used to a particular sound, a particular sensation, and it's a full adult soprano sound that you have developed. And it's instant. You reach for it and it's there, right? If you go from muscle memory, it's really not going to work because things are different in there. And what instead we can do is imagine you've just had a severe sinus infection for 6 weeks. How would you approach singing then, right? You're going to be very gentle. You're going to be really sensing. And I think this is a perfect analogy because I'm sure you have life experience dealing with performing under these less ideal laryngitis type conditions. So all the practices you've already developed. I've known some performers who drink apple cider vinegar to reduce inflammation. Of course, we could steam, we could nebulize. I mean, there's so many practices. Yes. And most important, by the way, is vocal rest when we need it. So listening to our bodies is essential. Your body will tell you if something is feeling really tender, right? And then you have a choice. Do I want to override that and push myself, or do I want to listen to that and honor the need and be very, very gentle with myself? And so what a lot of folks find is that they need to just change how they approach these notes. We might be using a smaller stream of air, and we really need to totally disconnect any objective of power, vocal power and projection. Okay. It's just not our highest concern this week, right? Now, some people, again, are not going to have these symptoms at all, in which case, do whatever. Because if you don't have symptoms, you don't have to manage symptoms. The other complication, of course, is that as our range drops, our registers and passages are also dropping. So the other place we run into trouble is we're just disoriented. It feels like the notes have moved, and that is not fair. That feels unfair. We learned where the notes were once.
Yeah.
Now they've moved. And my favorite analogy for this is it's like if you were out of the house and someone broke into your home and rearranged all the furniture, and then you're walking through the house in the dark and you're stubbing your toe everywhere because nothing is where you think it is.
Right.
So we see range drops by an octave, registers drop by about a half an octave. And so sometimes if we were just singing a cappella and just exploring head voice register, we might be aiming for pitches that are too high. And so sometimes it just doesn't work. You feel like you're hitting a wall.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, maybe aiming for a lower pitch. And I'm not saying necessarily an octave lower, maybe an octave lower, depending on if you're aiming really high, but maybe just a fourth lower, maybe a fifth lower. What you're doing is so thoughtful and proactive. I think the biggest curveball that people experience is they're so surprised by how disorienting this is. And I think you're getting out ahead of it and understanding this is going to be disorienting. And what is strategic for someone like you as a career singer is just adapting quickly. And so the only key to that is knowing that this is coming. It's coming down the pike and being ready to adapt. That if you're not ready for it, boy, it's a lot harder. And so I think just your everyday exercising your voice, vocalizing, sirening, exploring, noodling around with repertoire, and just clocking things in real time, I think will really help you. Because I think it's so hard to feel like, I had professional training. I don't feel like a professional anymore because now I'm lost and confused. And so, yeah, I think you adapting to the changes and then quickly recognizing, okay, I have a skills gap here. I need to very quickly gain skills in this one area, being able to identify that quickly, you know?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great tool to have kind of be self-identifying, like, oh, I'm missing some skills here now, like as it's changing, because that hasn't happened yet. Although, I have been trying on tenor repertoire, and it's like wearing my dad's clothing when I was like a small child, right? It's too big, but you can still see the shapes. So that's been fun. Or like the analogy of driving a car and everything feels too big, like the steering wheel's up here and the gas pedal's way over there.
Right.
Yeah. But my head voice, like my upper registers, like very much still there, and like it feels good. Like it doesn't feel thicker or anything. It's still there. I'm enjoying it. So I don't know, when things start to go missing or feeling misplaced in my house, then I'm going to be calling you and many other people. Help.
Please, I would love to help with that.
What do I do?
Yeah. Let me also say, by the way, when those vocal cord swelling symptoms are very severe, sometimes people lose the head voice completely. And I don't think that happens as frequently as it was happening 20 years ago because people were prescribed such high doses 20 years ago. So I mentioned that just in case anyone watching this is experiencing that or knows someone who experienced that if the head voice disappears, it is a sign of vocal cord swelling, and it is normal. It is actually normal, and it comes back. Head voice will come back when that swelling goes down. I think it's less likely to happen nowadays with the dosage that people are typically on nowadays. But I think it may be worth mentioning for anyone who does experience that. And in the early studies, we see a lot of that referenced.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really good to know too, that there's been a shift with symptoms, with dosage, and
there's a spectrum of symptoms.
there's a spectrum.
And so
Yeah.
That's I think what's helpful to know is most people are on the spectrum. They're not at the most severe end of the spectrum.
Okay. Good to know. I'd love to ask you, what do you love about your voice?
Yes, thank you for asking. I really feel like I have the voice I was meant to have.
Yeah.
In the same way that I did not vibe with classical soprano singing, I really felt like it was a register issue, a stylistic issue, a genre issue. And my original interest in singing was listening to these musical theater singers who were using mixed voice, who were belting, and a little more grounded in speaking voice. I love the kind of transition from speaking to singing and speech like singing and talk singing and all those in betweens, because to me that feels very grounded in real life human interactions, but also to be located in a very chest voice centered, mixed voice centered style feels like a good fit. And, I sing like a tenor. I have tenor passages and tenor range and tessitura. And it just feels like such a correct reflection of who I am. And I can also do a decent impression of an alto if I wanted to feminize in a more intentional way, which is also fun for me, and the more kind of genderqueer elements of my personality and my artistry. So, and then the other thing I love, honestly, is I just love very difficult tenor singing. And I'm sure you have felt this way about some of that Queen of the Night, very difficult soprano singing. It's so fun, It's so physical and athletic and exciting, and the whole body engages and participates. And it helps me feel connected to my body in a way that's sort of an antidote to that dysphoria, dissociation that can happen. And so, I just feel so grateful that I've arrived I feel like, at the voice that matches me. And I never would have imagined, honestly, that I would have arrived at this kind of a place, that it just was outside of what I could picture for myself. So how fortunate to have arrived here. Yeah.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear. And I wish that for every person, whether they're trans or cis, or if they don't even identify. Like, I think it's one of the greatest gifts when you can feel fully who you are, and to be able to express who you are in the way that you want to. So
and as artists, we need to have the right instruments to really express ourselves. I think that's part of it is, we need the right tools. And so, for me, tenor singing was the right tool.
Yes. Yeah. And especially as vocalists, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Where can people find you online, and what kind of services do you offer?
Absolutely. Well, my website is peterfullerton.com. And one of the things I'm hosting on that platform is a very long resource list. So you can find that by going to peterfullerton.com and clicking on trans resources. I have one resource list for vocalists and a second resource list for voice educators. And of course, people are welcome to look at both lists. I'm also on social media, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, at Peter Fullerton Voice. And the services I offer are voice training in the form of voice lessons and voice coaching and speech training. I work with people on their singing voice and their speaking voices. And I really do work with people of all genders, but with this niche specialty in helping people with testosterone.
I am just in such deep gratitude for knowing you and knowing that you exist, and being able to interact with you and share and connect and be in community with you, Peter. So thank you so much for your time and sharing who you are with me and with whoever's going to watch this video. It was really special, so I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And I really value this connection. And I'm so grateful that I can offer you support in your journey, because I really do. I almost feel like you're like a mascot for the classical singing transmasc community. I just want, I want to support you and help bring people's attention to your work. And so happy that I can offer you tools and resources. That's really was my whole intention in specializing in this field in this way. It was exactly this. So I'd be ready for you and the people in your position. So I'm so grateful that you found me and that we've connected, and very excited to keep chatting and hearing about how this goes.